Welcome to Irish Illustrated's Tracking the Trail. I'm Drew Mentocht, joined by our Notre Dame recruiting expert, Eric Thomas. Thanks to everyone for joining us to discuss the latest in Notre Dame recruiting. In our second segment, we will also answer some subscribers' questions, but first, we wanted to dive into the most recent news from the trail. Since our last episode, Notre Dame has picked up four more commitments, giving the Irish 16 prospects in the class of 2026. According to 24/7 Sports, Notre Dame currently has the number 2 overall ranked class in the country. More importantly, the team's average recruiting ranking is 92.21, which ranks the Irish third among programs with at least 10 commitments thus far. That's certainly helped by Notre Dame's most recent addition. On Wednesday, blue chip running back Jonas Walton picked Notre Dame over offers from Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Stanford, and others. Eric, what stands out to you about Walton, who's listed at 5'9" and 205 pounds? And does he fit into the class better than the other four-star backs Notre Dame had offered, like Brian Bonner, Messiah Mickens, and Dzefin Walker?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for Walton, the first thing that stands out is just the overall versatility as like an every down back. Not only is he a player who you see when you watch his highlight tape, like he can bounce the ball outside, which can be a negative if it's undisciplined, but he can bounce the ball outside for big plays. He can take it between the tackles for big plays. He's also an excellent pass catcher and pass blocker. There are actually reps on Walton's tape where at 5'9", 205 pounds, he's lined up as a tight end and basically sealing the end block for other running backs. Now, he's not pass blocking in these situations, so it's a little bit different. But the fact that they have that level of trust for him to be able to assign him like that responsibility to seal holes and blocking assignments is pretty impressive. He also just the other day, he finished second in Georgia 4A 100 meter. I think he ran like a 10.72 100 meter for that placement. Finished actually ahead of fellow Notre Dame commit Bubba Frazier. So I don't necessarily see like elite game breaking Jeremiah Love or even Jadarian Price-esque speed on tape, but the track times tell us it's there. So there's a player that definitely has, a lot of physical tools and capability to maybe upgrade his play speed at the next level and kind of take that next step too. But on the whole, he's just a well-rounded player. He's strong. He runs with a lot of power. And I think when you talk about the fit, I don't necessarily know, if he fits better than maybe Brian Bonner, because like Brian Bonner and Javian Osborne, or Brian Bonner and Jonas Walton, if you want to go that way, would be like true thunder and lightning, different types of backs. But Bonner's like that true, like elite speed home run hitter. But that said, the balance that Osborne presents is like a make you miss, but also really dedicated between the tackles runner, with Walton's ability to bounce outside, kind of do different things, be versatile as an every down back. That side of things does give them a very well-rounded backfield moving forward. And it's about as good of a duo that you could land just in terms of like quality of prospects in this cycle or even in recent cycles. It's two excellent running backs. You'd be sort of nitpicking to say like, oh, I think Bonner might be better than Walton for Osborne, or Walker might be a better pair for Jonas Walton than Osborne, whatever it is. You can nitpick a bit, but it's an excellent class.
And what made Notre Dame want to go out and get two running backs, or in your opinion, think that was kind of a necessity?
Yeah, well, they only had the one last class come signing day, but they originally did want to take multiple. They had Daniel Anderson and Justin Thurman committed, and then obviously there was some shifts in the priority there, and they ended up landing, just the one in Nolan James Jr. So it does create a hole a little bit for the next class when you don't hit your mark, so to speak. So I think even when Dylan McCullough was the sheriff in town, so to speak, they were going to look to add two. The overwhelming presumption is that Jeremiah Love is gone next season, and Jadarian Price probably is too. And there's always the possibility for additional departures, even with the quiet portal cycle where guys like Jabron Payne, Aeneas Williams, and Kedron Young all stayed at Notre Dame. So getting that two-back class was always going to be important to kind of hedge against any potential movement, even if, the roundabout conclusion of that is that there really isn't a ton from them in 2025 so far. The other side of things is now with Jawan Sider in town, obviously different coaches have different preferences. Sorry about my cat. Different coaches have different preferences, right? They're going to want to build the room for different responsibilities or with different compositions. And so to get multiple backs, especially blue chip backs like this in his first class, really gives him a strong launching point to build the room in his image moving forward. And kind of set the groundwork for what this is going to look like in a Jawan Sider era running that room.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too with Sider because I believe he also got the commitment to Penn State from Messiah Mickens. So that's three blue chip running backs he's earned commitments from at, albeit two different spots. So clearly his recruiting acumen is already standing out in this cycle. So there's definitely a lot for Notre Dame fans to be excited
And
about with him.
on that, it's interesting too that I think it was Osborne, it might have been Walton, but I think it was Osborne who mentioned this to me. Coach Sider recruited him at Penn State even when he didn't have a spot for him. Like they were only taking one at Penn State. It was Messiah Mickens. It was decided early. But Sider is a continual recruiting guy. He kind of has that maybe you call it like an SEC or Nick Saban kind of era mindset where they just keep recruiting guys, just cover all contingencies. And that played a big factor in getting Osborne kind of in the second win to come into Notre Dame and kind of get that secondary recruitment effort up. So it's really a testament to him and kind of the doggedness with which he approaches this process that they were able to get these two done.
Well, that's interesting because that's definitely something he talked about at his introductory press conference. And it's always, people can say whatever they want, but when they actually put that into action, that's always a promising sign.
Yeah.
Next, we want to get to on May 10th, 24/7 Sports Composite 4-star defensive tackle Tiki Hola joined the class as well. He's from just outside Austin, Texas area. Eric, how does he fit into Notre Dame's now three-man defensive line class? And how did the Irish land him despite a late push from SMU?
Yeah, it's Tiki's an interesting prospect because he is his listed height weight is all over the place. You can see him, 6'1" and change, 6'2", and like maybe closer to like 280, 285. And then there's other ones that list him like 6'4", 300 plus. Regardless of what the truth is, and I'm more inclined to think that he's a shorter, heavier prospect from what I've seen. He is just like stout as can be. I actually kind of had to change my view because I thought Tim Priester made a good point in talk about him recently. He called him a penetrator, and at first that wasn't the way I kind of looked at his game. Because really, when I look at Tiki, the main thing that I see is he's stout, but his arms are long for his frame. So he's really strong at extension. He has great visibility in the backfield, and he's able to create chaos by holding the point of attack and then kind of deciding when he has to make a move, as opposed to just like burrowing into someone's chest and trying to create as much impact as possible. He's kind of tactical. But what Tim's point was that really kind of caught me is he talked about how he's a penetrator in that he's able to create these openings for himself and kind of attack downhill. So even if he's not making plays for, -1, -2 yards, if it's at the line of scrimmage or a 1 yard gain, he's still penetrating the line of scrimmage of blockers pushing upfield. And I think that that's actually a more accurate representation of who he is as a player, because I always talk about him as having limited pass rushing utility. But I think there's more meat on that bone at the next level for a player in Hola's mold. He probably translates best to nose tackle as opposed to the 3-tech, which is more of your pass rushing defensive tackle. But again, he creates opportunities for guys around him to create pass rushing opportunities because he can hold the line of attack and kind of create those openings in the upfront protection, just because he has such good visibility and good physicality. So I really like Tiki Hola. I actually am higher on him now than I was probably about 6 weeks ago. Just kind of diving into the film more as the commitment neared and listening to some other perspectives, it kind of reframed the way I was maybe visualizing what I was seeing. And when you look at the defensive lineman Notre Dame's bringing in, he's a unique one because a lot of times we've talked about like it's edge prospects moving interior, it's linebackers moving to edge, and there's a lot of that athletic upside let him grow into the position at Notre Dame. Hole is a pure defensive line prospect. They know that. They're gearing up. That's what the messaging has been. So he's someone that's going to be able to go in, and they already have an idea of like, okay, we know what your tools are, but we know what your tools look like in the role we want you to play. And I think that's going to be really important for Hola to establish himself probably, in 2027 as an interior player, just with how long these things kind of take to move and where the depth chart is with nose and everything. But if he takes a year in the weight room and kind of gets himself, understands exactly where he needs to be physically to sustain himself at the next level, he could really be an impact player.
And I think I mentioned on SMU too. I know they kind of got a late, visited him late and stuff like that. How did Notre Dame kind of like hold them off and get him in the class?
Yeah, it was tough. So in January, he visited Notre Dame. From that point on, really did seem like they were going to be right in that lead group or right there at the top. And there was a little push of USC momentum, and then it seemed like Notre Dame retook the lead. And then, as you talked about, SMU really came on strong at the end of this process. There was a couple factors involved with that. SMU was offering more upfront money than Notre Dame was. SMU is obviously closer, and there's different sort of values that you can offer there, just with not only, hey, your parents can come see, it's a short drive, but also just local marketing and the opportunities available there. And then there was sort of another factor in this, which is that not only is SMU an ascending program that's really hot in the Dallas area and everything, but specifically SMU in their recruiting is making a living off of going after good prospects in Texas that may have been overlooked by Texas A&M, some of these other schools in the area. And Hola was one where they treated him like a top of the board prospect pretty early in this process. That messaging was consistent, and down the line, it really reaped rewards for them where he felt like that. He felt like he was being looked at as a true like blue chip, not a composite 4-star. He's a 3-star. This was a blue chip player in their mind, and he felt that from them. Ultimately, what it came down to for Notre Dame, though, was they were able to sell the relationships that they built with him. They were able to sell the belief in him that he is an NFL player and that his value will be maximized over time by coming to Notre Dame and developing into the best version of himself, which is a Sunday player in their eyes. And then sort of the third factor here is when you look at life beyond football, and it's not even just like the degree and everything there, but I think when he was visualizing like where he wanted to be, the Notre Dame class made a significant push to land Tiki Hola. And that was visible, in the 24 hours before his commitment. That's what people are going to look at. But this was months-long effort. For months, several Notre Dame pledges, commits that are now commits, their targets at the time, were talking with Hola about what it would be like to be at Notre Dame. And he's someone that really values relationships and those connections. And I think ultimately that peer recruiting played a pretty big part in things with him feeling comfortable taking his talents to South Bend.
And about a week before Hola committed, composite 4-star Jacoby Clapper became the second linebacker in Notre Dame's 2026 class. That was on May 2nd. He's listed at 6'1", 215 pounds out of St. Xavier in Cincinnati. He had offers from Ohio State, Oregon, but also generated probably the least amount of buzz out of the commitments Notre Dame has earned over the last 2 months. Eric, what do you like about Clapper, and what are his potential limitations in a linebacker room that's probably as talented as any in the country right now?
Yeah. Rangy player, big hitter. He can go sideline to sideline. He looks comfortable in space, which is a big thing I look for in linebackers. There are guys who are capable of athletically of doing things in space, but if they don't look comfortable doing it, it's a moot point. I think Clapper, looks comfortable being assigned roles where he has to cover, like a low zone. He's very disciplined in doing that. And there's different things he does athletically on that side of things where he looks a lot like a modern linebacker. Like he looks the part of a modern college linebacker. I think the limitations and the questions start with just like size and the top end athleticism. When you talk about a guy being a sideline to sideline linebacker, is he a sideline to sideline linebacker that's gonna, he can start on the left hash and make a play for a loss of yards on the right hash? Some guys can do that, some guys can't. I think Clapper's more the guy who's going to make a tackle for a 3-yard gain on the right hash from that situation. So there is maybe an unfair comparison with how spoiled Notre Dame has been with the caliber of linebackers they're bringing in. Like this is legitimately a 3-4-star, high 3, low 4-star prospect. He's a really good player. But when you look at relative to what's been brought in, those questions emerge. When I'm kind of forecasting what Clapper could be at Notre Dame, there's definitely questions just about like, what is the pathway here, right? And I think that's natural for any position. But when you're as strong as Notre Dame is at linebacker, you have to ask, like, where is the pathway to finding the field? And for Clapper, it's tough to see like an organically created pathway for him to get into that like really significant contributor ranks before what, 2027, 2028, just based on the other guys they brought in and the number of linebackers they have. So look, and if he shows up, he balls out and he earns that spot, that's what happens. It's great. That's what the whole competition part of this is about. But just from an outside observer, it can be very difficult with the other talents that have been brought in and the versatility and athleticism they have. It can be a little bit difficult to see how Clapper's going to, break out ahead of any of those guys and establish himself. But He's a good athlete, a good player. And from speaking with him a few times, from talking to sources about him, the mindset to improve and just be the best version of himself at Notre Dame, it's very ingrained. They couldn't get a better player from that perspective, just details and detail-oriented focus of self-improvement.
It's interesting too because it sounds like athletically that's not really a concern. It's maybe more can he get to the size at and maintain his athleticism potentially. Is there something I know? I believe in Tim Priester's in the film room, he talked a little bit about how it seemed like he added maybe 10 or 15 pounds more recently. Are you looking to see if he can maybe add a little more weight this fall and kind of maintain that? What do you want to see from him this fall before he
Yeah,
gets
he
started?
prior to committing, I think he was listed at 6'1.5", 185, and that has since been adjusted to like 215. I've spoken with a number of sources close to them. Obviously, Notre Dame has a lot of visibility into St. X through Gordy Silkstead and the mutual connections in Ohio. Um, I, I have it pretty well sourced that he's about 215 heading out of football season now. If he can play around that level, that's a huge boon for him. I don't know that he needs to get too much bigger for his senior year, but really you want to see him play around that level because he was probably playing, around the 200 mark for most of last year, maybe even below. Um, so being able to show some of that and show that sideline to sideline versatility, like I said, and some of the quickness, the instinctiveness holding up, instinctiveness, not just like identifying play, but physically being able to react and get there. Seeing that at size is going to be important. He's also a young prospect. So like you said, Drew, with the questions about frame, I mean, he's a guy who, if he were to, grow another inch or add weight, you start to question like, okay, well, this is a little bit different than what we saw. Now, okay, maybe he can be like a true middle linebacker prospect, or maybe he can do some outside linebacker work for us. So there's still possibilities with him growing there as well. But really for this season, what you want to see is him stick around that 215 number and look not only as explosive and versatile as he did in the past, but I want to see more of like the flash plays, like when he comes downhill and just nails a dude because he can. I want to see more of that as opposed to maybe the lightening up and letting off right before the hit, or having to rip a guy down to the ground every time. Like just physical, just bring him to the ground. You don't have to do the whole like alligator death roll thing when you get to that size. You want to see a little bit more of that detail because it's all indicative of a linebacker who's going to be a little bit more consistently successful at the next level.
Yeah, definitely. And lastly, four-star safety Aiden Pouncy pledged to the Irish on April 26th. He's from Winter Park in Florida, and he might be the most intriguing prospect to commit to Notre Dame over the last month. This might be a little unorthodox of me, but I want our listeners to hear a few lines from the In the Film Room from Irish Illustrated's Tim Priester on Pouncy. He wrote, "To watch the 6'2.5", 165-pound four-star Aiden Pouncy play football for Winter Park High School is one of the greatest joys of analyzing prep football players and projecting them to the next level. This is a tremendous athlete and instinctual football player who influences games in a multitude of ways. In the versatile Pouncy is an acrobat in cleats. He is a graceful, grease-hipped athlete who glides around a football field. He's a hovercraft. He can make all the plays, a receiver, cornerback, safety, and as a return man, and he does so with the greatest of ease." I don't know if I did reading that justification, but Eric, do you hold Pouncy in a similar regard? And how did Notre Dame land this talented prospect?
Yeah, Pouncey's awesome, man. He's super good. When I watch Aiden Pouncy, look, there's players who, when they play defensive back, they're better at safety and they want to play corner, right? Like corners make more money, they get all the fame, they get, you get the branding like, oh, it's Revis Island, it's Sauce Gardner, like you get all this notoriety with it. So a lot of young defensive backs want to play corner and they shouldn't. That's not the case with Pouncey. This is a guy who could play safety. He could play corner. He's a good player. I still think ultimately his best projection is at safety. But the fact that this is even a question and it's a legitimate question is just a showcase of exactly that fluidity that Tim talked about, that natural grace that he has. And it's a cross-directional grace. Like when he's working backwards, he's so efficient at flipping his hips and just staying on the hip of his receiver. He never looks lost in coverage. He he wastes so little movement that it's very difficult to get him out of position with a false step or a really good break or anything like that. So on that side of things, he's just excellent. I fully agree with the what Notre Dame's landing here and kind of some of the overarching themes. Like I said, I think he's a better safety, and I think when you look at what the way Notre Dame deploys their safeties, really versatile roles. Xavier Watts could do on one play, he's in cover one, he's over the top. On the next, he's doing a deep half, cover two look. On the next play, he's rotated down and he's covering like a robber role on the low side on the field. There's all different roles that the Notre Dame safeties play. And last year with Schuler and Watts, we saw them able to kind of rotate between those two and put them in different looks to confuse defenses. Pouncey's only an extension of that. With a guy like him, you can put him in the nickel in certain roles. You can put him at either safety spot. You can put him at corner, and you can feel comfortable knowing that whatever his assignment is, he has the athletic tools and just the sheer ball playing ability to make a play, man. He's just so just kind of thinking back, like I'm literally remembering like plays where he like jumps in front of passes that he had no business doing. Like there's just so many little instinctive parts of his game. He's fantastic, and I appreciate the romanticizing of it all by Tim. I do think ultimately, though, when you see a player like this, it's totally fair to get excited and kind of lean into that stuff because he's a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, and it's interesting too with Mike Mickens taking over the whole defensive back room at this point, and just what he's able to do with safeties in particular, and teaching them some of those coverage skills. And really, I mean, you even look at what Schuler did in his first year as a starter. I mean, I think his coverage numbers were excellent. So I think that should be intriguing as well, as long as Mickens is here, that's the type of skill set he in particular could really utilize and develop for Notre Dame as well. Did want to touch on too, just what was the recruiting process like for him? I feel like he wasn't a name I was as aware of until, he was committing. So how did Notre Dame kind of get him in the class, and what was that process like?
Yeah, it was interesting with Pouncy because he has a connection to Notre Dame, and I don't want to misremember which brother it was. I think it was Jordan. Yes, Jordan. His older brother Jordan was a wide receiver commit who committed to Notre Dame, ended up decommitting and going to Florida and Texas. So there was already a connection there to the Pouncy family. Now with Aiden, Notre Dame got in on him, and I think early on there was a little bit of maybe reticence, like, I don't know, like, he's kind of got like the family connection with Jordan. We don't know if he's really going to be as interested. But as it went through the process, like Florida, Miami had a lot of confidence, and Notre Dame seemed to be kind of running just behind that group. And they were in striking distance. That was kind of the big deal, right? Is that they maintained striking distance for themselves. When he came and visited campus, and I want to say that was the March 22nd. Sorry, I'm trying to find my notes. When he came and visited campus in March, Notre Dame really started to separate from the pack. And it became clear, I think, to him and to us in the national media side that Notre Dame wasn't necessarily like option 3. It was there's a big 3 and Notre Dame is in it. So once that connection sort of happened, we started to pay a little bit more attention. Like, okay, Pouncey's really serious about Notre Dame. It's not just like oh yeah, he's interested kind of deal, because we see those. And then he came back in April. And when that trip was announced, it was sort of a good signal, like, okay, 1 month later, he's coming back. This is pretty serious intention. And on that trip, they really just sort of buttoned up everything, kind of made him feel at home at Notre Dame. And at that point, it became a foregone conclusion where this thing was going to go. So it really comes down to those 2 spring visits separating Notre Dame and them putting themselves in a position to just be in striking distance come March. Because like you said, we were monitoring him. He was definitely someone who was, on our radar as following the recruiting side, but it felt unlikely that he was going to end up at Notre Dame. Probably even into the beginning of March, it felt like they were kind of a trail end option, and that just flipped on its head. It's really a testament to Coach Mickens, Carter Allman, and the defensive staff and recruiting staff.
And we're back with our second segment, which we're borrowing from Irish Illustrated Insider, Burning Up the Boards. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions. We will get to as many of those today as we can. A few we will also condense or combine. We will also save a few others for upcoming articles or to address on a later episode of Tracking the Trail when we have some more time. But we really do appreciate all of those. First, we have a combination of 4 questions from Carson 44, Hobbs 924, CP 11, and Nick Groby on Notre Dame's 2027 recruiting or quarterback recruiting. I definitely get why so many people are interested in this topic. So it starts with there's a lot of chatter, concern, and even hand wringing about no 2027 quarterback being offered yet. What do you think is the biggest reason for this? Is it a new intentional approach due to what the staff has experienced in the past classes? Is it due to the changeover at the GM spot after a very long season? Is it Gino Guidugli wanting to spend more one-on-one time with each prospect? Is it ND waiting to see all the QB star this summer? And will that be on campus? Are we getting to a point where maybe making an offer would be a priority number one? Is there not enough NFL NIL money to go around without forcing a guy to leave? So that's a long question. We combined again 4 of those to kind of get to some of the angst people are feeling. So Eric, kind of take it away. I know there's a lot there, and kind of, I'm sure people are anxious to know the answer.
Yeah. Sorry if you hear my cat again. Stop. Lot there. So let's start with just the basics. Notre Dame has not offered a 2027 quarterback yet. That has been a process we've been discussing since early March before Pot of Gold Day. In February, we were anticipating at least a couple of quarterback offers, and then we started to hear from sources in South Bend, like, maybe pump the brakes. Like, we're going to take our time. The biggest factor in that is the in-person evaluations, and that is not only getting to see these guys throw in person, it's also seeing these guys do just like regular practice drills, athletic drills, getting a full, idea of what these guys are as prospects. And in a lot of these meetings and evaluations, there's also a component of like evaluation or mental evaluation, I should say. And what that looks like is in a meeting with, the coaches and the player, they'll run through a series of plays or whatever else, like, oh, here's an install meeting. We'll go through these 4 or 5 things. They'll have whatever conversation they're going to have normally. And then at the very end, they'll go, hey, by the way, install play number 3. What was that? And get it aligned. And there's just little things like that are built in. So Coach Guidugli does a lot of like NFL draft style analysis. And I say that with a smile and quotes, but it's not a bad thing. It's just I don't know what else to compare it to. But it is still that same like pre-draft, like almost mind games they're playing with these guys, trying to figure out who they are, what and what they're bringing to the table. When it comes to timeline here, I would anticipate June is the month for offers. We're already midway through May, and they haven't extended any. They have been hitting the road here recently. They visited with several top quarterbacks in the class of 2027 over recent weeks. That includes familiar faces like Malachi Ziegler. That includes Gunnar Rivers. They went and saw Peter Borke at the very beginning of the offseason. And then that's even like new faces. Like they went down to Louisiana and saw Elijah Haven. And they've seen a number of guys. I have a list somewhere that I'm currently trying to get pulled up, but there's like 14 guys that they visited this offseason now. So it's a lot. For them, the concern was, especially given some of the changes in the recruiting calendar and what we saw in the class of 2026, quarterbacks are committing earlier and earlier. Last year, Noah Grubbs committed to Notre Dame on June 1st. And at that point, Notre Dame had already gone through the process of not only recruiting Grubbs, but identifying him as their preferred target amongst several class of 2026 quarterbacks and kind of narrowing down the list. Grubbs committed quick. And at that point, when he committed, I think it was like 8 of the top 10 guys were committed. He was like number 7 or 8 of the top 10, something like that. Notre Dame does not want to find themselves in a situation like they had last year at running back, where they have the wrong guy committed. And after a year, they find that out. So getting the due diligence and doing everything up front now, it does elongate the upfront process and the hesitation, but it ultimately makes them feel more vindicated in taking a commitment down the line. We are approaching the point where I would get nervous about like, hey, we probably need to get these on the board here, fellas, and kind of get this going. So there is a little bit of apprehension on my side about where this is going, but ultimately they're going to have a lot of campus, a lot of campus combines, regional camps, and stuff like that in June. So they'll have an opportunity to see these guys not only perform in person, but perform in person doing the drills that they want at their instruction. That's going to be quite informative for offers. And I would anticipate that that is probably the marker at this point for earning an offer, as opposed to a May visit on campus or anything like that. I covered off a lot of that question. There's about 15 questions in there. Is there anything I missed?
No, I think you did an excellent job. And I think it's worth highlighting too, just, even with somebody like CJ Carr, I think in addition to like all, the arm talent, a lot of things he does, I think it was important for the staff to see him back in the day, how he led others, even in a camp sitting, and I think that's even to this day, one of the reasons why I have a lot of faith that he would be the one to win the job, is because it is some of those things that they, even for as young as he is. And so I'm sure you can get a better sense of that. I mean, it's one thing for his high school coach to tell you he's an excellent leader, but you want to see certain things in person, I'm sure. And I'm also, we don't have to get into it, but curious with, that you mentioned Philip Rivers' son. I mean, it's a big Catholic family. He's also, lives in Fairhope, which is where Riley Leonard is from. There's a big connection there. So I'd be kind of curious if they do get involved there, if maybe that would help them to make some traction. I believe he's like a top 50 kid. So
yeah, he's
just
interesting. They mentioned him a lot, or sources mentioned him a lot early before the offer stuff kind of trickled out. And then really in like late February, March into April, we didn't hear his name a whole lot, which was interesting. And talking with people who were having conversations with staff as well, sort of outside of my conversations and everything, they weren't hearing his name a lot either. So it was interesting. I was beginning to feel like, okay, are they not as interested, or are they just prioritizing? They went and visited him, and based on where the board is, I don't think the quiet over the last few months is necessarily a lack of interest. I think they felt that relative to the rest of the board, their incomplete evaluation of him was at a place where they had to look around and kind of see other guys and then finish out his evaluation with the in-person. So I do think he's as viable as a candidate for a Notre Dame offer as a lot of these guys, which is different than maybe I felt 2 months ago when it was like, why won't they talk about him? But it's a little bit of an odd thing. It seems like the favorites that they have favorites is relative when you want to offer anyone, but the favorites they have kind of cycles, right? It's like, oh, we kind of like this guy, and then they go see someone else, like, oh, well, he's pretty good. So I think they not love a lot of guys right now, and they just need to get that last data point, and Gunnar Rivers is solidly in that group.
Next, we have another question that's kind of, an amalgamation of three different guys. So first we have our three different subscriber questions. First we have Jay New. How many defensive linemen is ND expected to take? There are 3 committed. Could that amount be doubled by signing day? And then Mario Kart God, how many more defensive linemen would you expect ND to take? What is the staff's preferred pecking order? What is yours? And lastly, kind of related, is Donnelly 3434. Consolidating a number of questions. What are the expected number ranges at each position group? Wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker, cornerback, and safety.
Yeah. Just run right through them. Jay New. Could that number be doubled by signing day? Yes. I think Notre Dame is going to look to take 5 to 6 defensive linemen in this class. They took 5 last cycle. Just looking at the last version of Tim O'Malley's scholarship chart before this podcast, Notre Dame is projected to lose 5 offensive linemen next year. So taking another 5 or 6 in reinforcement would not only, make sure that they have the numbers moving forward, but if they were to jump to that 6 range, it would also hedge against future transfer, right? So you kind of have a +1 there. The big thing right now in terms of where they're looking in preferred pecking order, obviously there's 2 different positions there. And with the end and the interior, I'm not 100% sure, because this would be swing guys, right? So I'm not 100% sure if Elijah Golden is as preferred if he wants to play interior, right? If he comes out and says, I want to play interior line, I'm not sure he's a top 3 guy at the interior defensive line only, whereas he solidly is a top 3 guy on their board if you look at him as a defensive end swing tackle, right? So with that kind of caveat, like position fit wise, it might be a little funky. The 3 top guys, I think the biggest signal actually came from our guy, Javian Osborne. I've written extensively about how he's recruiting, and Tom Loy mentioned the other day when I asked him about vocal peer recruiters, he said they're doing what the coaches want them to do, right? They're making sure that the messaging is consistent. They're getting after those guys. Well, shortly after Tiki Hola committed, oh god, we got chaos happening here. Shortly after Tiki Hola committed, Javian tweeted out, all the big guys need love too. All eyes on y'all, come home. And he tagged Elijah Golden, Alistair Vallejo, Mikhail Blade. Right now, I think those are probably the three guys at the top of the board with the highest amount of mutual interest at Notre Dame, if you want to put it that way. I think those are probably the three guys that Notre Dame would most like to have in the class and who are most strongly associated with Notre Dame and kind of narrowing down their list with them in mind. Beyond that, there are a few other guys: Trey Quinn, Xavier Griffin-Haynes, Marcus Alamada. Oh gosh, I wrote down a bunch of names because there's just a bunch of them. But Noah Clark, another interior lineman. So when you're running through the list, there are a bunch of options, but those three I think are kind of the emerging top of the board options and probably the highest ceiling options of the bunch, if you want to go about it that way. Those are the guys Notre Dame kind of sees as the longest term projections. And then kind of consolidating the other ones, like we talked about: defensive end, defensive tackle. Defensive tackle, I think they're probably going to get two. If they can get three, I don't know that they would be able to say no. Like if they were able to land Vallejo and Clark, I don't know that they would say no, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I think two is the more likely there. I think they'll probably end up getting four defensive ends. And when I say four defensive ends, that once again comes with the caveat that Mikhail Blade and Elijah Golden are swing players. So they're going to project end. They're probably going to start strong side end, but if one of them is a 3-tech by the end of their career, no one's going to be surprised. Beyond that, wide receiver, I think the most likely outcome right now is targeting 5. Whether or not they land 5 kind of depends on some Texas decisions, namely Braden Robinson, Caden Finley, and Cohen Brown. But those are the 3 guys that they want to add to this class most primarily. There's a few other options, including Larry Fitzgerald's son, Devin Fitzgerald. Had to give him a nod, but I really think they're going to target that 5 number. Tight end 2. They want 2. They're going to go after 2. Jacobson's the most likely add. Beyond that, Ian Premer, Matt Ludwig is kind of leaning Michigan, but he's up there as well. Ideal class is Jacobson Premer at this point. Offensive line, they're already at 4. They want to get to 5. That'll be either Grayson McKeo or I want to say Ebenezer Iwatade, and that's not him. It's Akene Ogboko, his teammate. I think they want to get to 5. If they don't get either McHugh or Ogboko for whatever reason, which is, I think they'll get one, but if for whatever reason they don't get one of the 2, I do think they would be comfortable staying at 4, but would probably end up pivoting to try and add another tackle. And then looking at linebacker here, 3, they want to add Tank King and probably call it a day. They would also be very interested in adding Talanoa Illy. I do not think they're going to get the opportunity to add Talanoa Illy. I think he is, based on the reporting yesterday, I think he's probably leaning a little bit closer to USC at this point, with Oregon in second and Notre Dame's kind of like a third option. And then corner safety, I've often looked at defensive back as kind of a monolith in this class because once again, you got guys like Pouncy could play corner, could play safety. Joey OBrien, somehow 6'4", but could play corner, and it's a legitimate question. Absurd. He's so good, it's absurd. So corner and safety, I think you're probably going to look at like 5-ish is the target total. What that looks like, how that breaks down, it somewhat depends on like, hey, Pouncy, before you arrive, we're going to name you a safety. Okay, well, then they might have 3 safeties. But there's a couple flex guys. If they land both Pouncy and O'Brien, it's very difficult for me to say how many are corners and safeties because I honestly don't even know where they're going to line up week 1.
That kind of transitions well into our next question. Karsten44 also asked, coming out of high school, how would you compare recently tabbed 5-star recruit Joey O'Brien to Kyle Hamilton? And in your opinion, does ND have a legitimate shot here?
To answer the latter one, yes, I have a crystal ball in for Notre Dame to land Joey O'Brien. So yes, they do have a shot. In terms of comparison, Joey O'Brien's probably I got to be careful when you make these comparisons, but like from a high school prospect perspective, right? Not what we've seen on the Ravens or even at Notre Dame, but from a high school prospect perspective, Joey O'Brien is one of the closest comparisons to Kyle Hamilton and one of the most earned player comps to Kyle Hamilton since that 2019 class. To give it another point, like Jadon Blair was a guy that got a lot of Hamilton comparisons because of the size. As a player, they are dramatically different. And I really like Jadon Blair. I ranked him, I think, top 10 in the class out of all the guys who came. But O'Brien's different. He's just a little bit of a different animal. He's an elite 2-way player. He has excellent ball skills. He has excellent body control when he elevates, and tremendous ability to not only leverage his natural size, where he can already go up and over you when he's 10 toes in the dirt, but when he elevates, he can really out leverage guys from his basketball background. He knows how to go up over you and come down with that football, and that shows as both a receiver and a defensive back. He is physical as all get out at the catch point and is very keen, and he loves to jump routes and get out in front of receivers and make those kind of like leaping interceptions where the guy jumps in from off frame that look really cool. He can do that. When he comes downhill, he's not quite as decisive as Hamilton was. Hamilton, as Notre Dame fans will remember, is unique, man. That guy's like a heat-seeking missile, and he was even like that in high school. I don't think Joey O'Brien's quite that just like instant, decisive, downhill, gonna make it and make the right angle, make the right calculation. Like, I don't think he's quite as elite at that level, but I think in terms of overall athletic testing numbers and stuff, he might actually be a little bit better like raw tester than Hamilton. Now, obviously, Hamilton was very good when he got to the combine. He was a very good, although not elite tester, because that's what ultimately forced him to fall to 14. I think Joey would have more of like that elite measurable numbers for like a 40-yard dash and short area quickness and stuff. But on the field, it's going to look relatively similar. I think that he is an outstanding prospect. And for as easy as it is to compare every 6'3+ safety to Kyle Hamilton, because you really want them to be that kind of all over, can do everything and do everything at a high level well kind of player, Joey O'Brien is the best prospect since the 2019 class to realize that potential with that frame and size. It's truly unbelievable. When I talked about the possibility for him to play corner, it's a legitimate question. He has great hips, he has great feet, he has great ball skills. So I can't speak highly enough of Joey O'Brien. And I know he just got minted as the number 30 player in the country and a 5-star prospect. I will not be surprised if he ends up within the top 20 by the end of this class. He is special.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and Kyle Hamilton obviously is not doing too bad for himself, as you mentioned, in the NFL right now either. Might be one of the most important defensive players in the NFL at this point in terms of just making sure whatever his team needs done gets done. So yeah, be curious to see what he does next year, and if Notre Dame can land O'Brien. Next question is from AMP36. It wouldn't be a recruiting pod without a question about the wide receivers. This class has a Caden Finley or bust feel to it. If Finley doesn't choose the Irish, where do they go from there? Would a strong season from Carr / Minchie help combat the negative recruiting from other schools, or would it be too little too late for the 2026 class?
It's a good question. And that secondary note is interesting because it's always a little bit weird to talk about negative recruiting and what the impact of the current season is for a guy committing in December. So there's a lot of angles here, but let's start with the top. So Caden Finley or bust. I do think that there is a growing sentiment that is kind of like the outlook for this class, and just being on the boards and kind of hearing how people talk about it. And I do want to push back a little bit against that. I think Dylan Faison is one of the more underrated prospects in America. He's the number 1 lacrosse recruit in the country with just freakish short area quickness. And last season, his junior film showed a player who was noticeably maturing as a receiver, able to make catches on the sideline and get his feet in bounds, able to go up and over guys and understand how to come down with the football and secure it. Making plays where the timing of his routes and his breaks and making sure that his details were on point were more and more part of his game. Like, this is a player who I think will dramatically outperform his recruiting ranking. Bubba Frazier is a player who just got minted into the top 247. And although you may have read, some film reviews and some criticisms like, oh, he's a little bit smaller, there's a little bit of a gadget player type tag to him, he's still an athlete in a body type that's not in that room right now, and a skill set that's not in that room right now. And then obviously beyond that, you have options with guys like Braden Robinson and, Devin Fitzgerald, and it goes on and on there. So I don't think it's necessarily Caden Finley or bust, but if you want to call this a class of wide receivers that can push for a championship, it very much is at this point. He's a great prospect. If he doesn't choose Notre Dame, where do they go? Well, if they land Braden Robinson, Cohen Brown, Bubba Frazier, and Dylan Faison, that's still a solid class of wide receivers that I think is going to be looked back at as underrated nationally. I also think that they would have the opportunity to pivot to a guy like Devin Fitzgerald or Brian Williams. I almost said Mike Williams, USC player. Brian Williams, Noah Grubbs' teammate. Down in Florida, there's a couple pivot points for like bigger body boundary receivers, which is really where Notre Dame sees Finley projecting to long term, especially because I've heard from a few people they think he could still be growing. But it's nerve-wracking, right? You can probably see it in my face. Like if they don't get Finley, it's going to be very tough to sell that this is a championship caliber receiver class. Just it's kind of the corner they back themselves into. On the negative side, Notre Dame has been recruiting Finley for over a year, and they've been at the forefront of those conversations for most of that time. Quite frankly, they've given Finley a lot to believe in, and I don't think that a strong season from Carr or Minchie is necessarily a requirement to fend off some of these negative recruiting. He sees that vision. It can reinforce, it can be proof of concept, but ultimately, I think it's less about what Notre Dame does in the passing game on the field from the quarterback position this season than it is like, oh, let's see Jaden Greathouse take another step forward. Let's see, Jordan Faison really develop that consistency in his game. Seeing those homegrown receiver talents take that next step with those quarterbacks is a little bit more important than just like, oh, they spread the ball out everywhere, but Carr looks really good, right? So I want to specify there's a little bit more nuance to it there, I think, to combat negative recruiting, but ultimately there's some truth to that. I just don't know if it's about the quarterbacks themselves.
It's interesting just to add on, Dylan Faison. I don't know as much about his game, but it's interesting you mentioned him already, playing receiver. Jordan, for as much success as he had early on, played quarterback in high school too. And so he was kind of having to learn a lot of things that he still hasn't had much experience at that position if you really look at it. So just the idea too, if they're, different players, obviously, but they're brothers. And it sounds like Dylan might be a little ahead of Jordan in terms of at least his knowledge of that position. Next, we wanted to go to a question from Spider-Man 45. He asks, if there were another shoot your shot week coming up, which 5 high school recruits would be on your list for a crystal ball?
This is a good question. I'll start with the caveat, just cover myself here. None of these crystal balls would maybe be as with as much conviction as the first week. Well, not none, most. But right now, if I had to put 5 crystal balls in, like we had to roll this out this week, it would probably be wide receiver Cohen Brown, wide receiver Braden Robinson, tight end Evan Jacobson, defensive end / defensive lineman Mikhail Blade, and defensive lineman Alistair Vallejo. On each of those, Cohen Brown just decommitted from USC, fresh off getting a Notre Dame offer. We've talked about, his friendship with Osborne and kind of all that on Irish Illustrated here recently. But really the main point here is this is a prospect who committed to USC, from what I gather, probably a little too early in his process. USC doesn't want guys taking looks around, and Notre Dame was already sort of on his radar here in the last couple of weeks before he decommitted, and now Osborne is kind of like another factor pulling him. So I think Notre Dame has a great chance here. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Cohen Brown ends up at Notre Dame. I think that if he takes other visits, it won't be a surprise, but Notre Dame will have a great shot here. Beyond that, Braden Robinson, Notre Dame's in his top 2. It's going to come down to Notre Dame and Miami. The Canes are tough, man. We saw them pull Jackson Cantwell the other day. They got NIL humming like crazy, which I know no one wants to talk about, but look, it's part of it. And not only that, but after last season, Miami sort of has a unique angle to sell some of these receivers, which is like, look what we did with Xavier Restrepo and the career that he had at Miami. Look at the offense that we were able to put together in just a couple of years of kind of reforming this vision. Now imagine what we could do with blue chip talent like yourself in there. And there's a lot of value in being able to pitch something like that with proof of concept, like Miami had last year with the #1 offense in the country. So it's going to be tough to land him in the end, but I do think Notre Dame is probably the odds-on favorite to get that done over the Hurricanes. Evan Jacobson, I've talked about extensively. I think he's the most likely option at tight end. Mikhail Blade, this one might be surprising because I know there was some sources saying Michigan had pulled out ahead. I don't actually believe Michigan ever took the lead in this race. They made it close. It's been interesting. It's been very close. But Notre Dame, I've said for months, Notre Dame has been setting the pace in this race for a long time. After his most recent visit, he came out again and said that, Notre Dame's setting the pace and they're probably his top school. So as far as I'm concerned, for Mikhail Blade, Notre Dame needs to sustain its current pace. They don't need to do anything special. It's like the coach halftime speech, right? You don't need anything special. You don't need anything extra. We have everything we need to win this ball game right here. That's what Notre Dame needs to feel with Mikhail Blade. They have everything they need to win this recruitment right in front of them. They've made a great pitch for him. They just need to close it out with the understanding that, you know, he's kind of approached this thing as a prolonged process. He wants all the data. He wants to check all those boxes. So Notre Dame needs to keep bringing it. And then for Vallejo, furious rise as a prospect. My God, Michigan offered like a month-ish ago, and now it seems like I can't go a day without hearing the newest updates about, you know, who's interested in him and what schools are contacting, because that's the kind of player he really is. Much more pass rushing utility when compared to like a guy from like Tiki Hola, just as a high school prospect, as an interior prospect. And I think that one's going to ultimately come down to Notre Dame and Michigan as kind of the two big players. And I really like where Notre Dame sits. I like the Texas nexus that they're building to kind of recruit him and kind of get that moving as well. So there's a lot moving in Notre Dame's direction here, despite the fact that Michigan got a bit of a head start.
From Kay Beasley, the 5-star conundrum seems always to come up that ND can't compete because these types don't want to choose hard and think a faster path to the NFL is not at ND. Do you buy into this narrative, or is there a large portion of NIL at play, or at least a high factor, and ND doesn't appear like they want to pay high for incoming freshmen compared to proven talent? That is a question, not a statement.
Yeah, no. There's always gonna. Oh my God, that was an attractive noise. There's always going to be a little bit of an oddity with answering this question because it's personal, right? 1 5-star is not the next, it's not the next, it's not the next. But let's talk general terms here. By and large, 5 stars are 5 stars, not just because they have God-given talents, but because they work their butts off to get to where they are. So I think that the idea that they don't want to choose hard is a little bit diminutive almost. It's like, yeah, these guys chose hard their whole lives. That's why they're here. Prioritize hard is a different conversation. If you're a 5-star and you have options, let's just call 2 very disparate academic situations, Georgia and Notre Dame. Both great programs. They both offer you pathways of development. Both offer you platforms to get to the NFL. Both offer you playoff opportunities. There's a lot of comparisons there. The flip side of that is at Georgia, they're graduating roughly 50% of their athletes. They do a heavy load of online classes, and there's not really nearly as much cultural or recruiting focus on the value of getting your degree. And there's less focus on a day-to-day basis of getting these guys to achieve at a high level in the classroom. It's more about just stay eligible, we'll get you through it. Notre Dame's obviously not the same way. And I bring this comparison up not just to talk trash, but to point out the fact that for these players, like if they're looking at this as I'm going to be there for 3 years and I want to be out the door and going to the NFL, one, a degree not factored into that. Now you might talk about guys, oh, what about if football doesn't work out? Most of them don't think like that. Most of these prospects do not think, what if football doesn't work out? They think, when I get to the NFL. So for them, the idea of not choosing hard and allowing them to focus more of their time per day on workouts, on film review, on doing whatever they need to do for football and not having to worry about the academics, it's almost a choice of priority for them. Like, I want to invest in this, so I'm choosing hard football exclusive, right? It's a different mindset. That being said, I do think that there are a lot of 5-stars who don't fit Notre Dame. They're just not going to be academically eligible. And that is just, you can't work around that, right? Whether that's just the natural field of guys, if say 40% of prospects in any given class are going to be able to get in Notre Dame, then that's going to apply to 5-stars too. And that's a random number, but 40% of 5-stars. So, all right, you go to 40%, that's what, 14, 15 guys total. So your market's already about half. And then you look at, okay, well, within those guys, how many of those guys want to stay close to home? That's a few guys off the list. How many of those guys are really focused on the NFL above anything else? That's the list. How many of these guys are chasing the big payday, like was mentioned here? Well, that's the list. So it does trickle down into a lower and lower field of guys that meet the priority. Is Notre Dame going to pay for high school talent? Yes, they're doing it this cycle more than they have previously. Does Notre Dame want to set the market for high school talent? No, they do not, especially not in this moment where there is no organized collective bargaining power or third-party watchdog or anything like that to make sure that the market is reflective of something that's sustainable, right? You can pay $2 million over market value for a left tackle or a tight end or whatever you want to do if you want. But realistically, if that guy doesn't live up to expectations and the market does not continue to balloon, you're looking at a situation a few years down the line where you're going to have to cut that player because you're not getting requisite value for what you paid them. So Notre Dame doesn't want to be at the forefront of paying high school players and finding themselves on the business end of like, oh, well, you got to take a pay cut. And I keep looking at it as like the NFL safety market. Look at Justin Simmons a few years ago for the Broncos. Guy was an all-pro, signed a big deal, plays 2 years on that contract, and the Broncos cut him unceremoniously. He's not a worse player now. He had one of his best seasons in Atlanta last year. He's not fundamentally that much worse of a player when he signed that second extension. He just, at some point, the value for his position and the value for what he was offering them was lower by no fault of his own because the market was lower. So I don't think Notre Dame wants to be in the business of overextending themselves for high school talent. And I think we're seeing them invest more in high school talent now because they see the guardrails coming down the track and they know they can be more competitive and more in tune with what the market actually dictates as opposed to doing something a little bit more out there, like you saw with Michigan last cycle or Texas A&M a few years ago.
Yeah, and to your point, I think with, in terms of like, do they want to set the market? I think it's also worth noting that like not every 5-star is built the same either. Some are like, man, this guy has incredible tools. He works hard. He might get there. And I mean, even that might fit like a Derek Meadows or somebody like that who you see all the potential, but do you want to set the market on a guy who's less likely to pan out? Whereas like, for instance, if you had interest from a Jeremiah Smith a few years ago, like that's a guy you're like, okay, well, maybe it's worth setting the market.
You pay that guy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's like even nuance to that Notre Dame, I'm sure, is aware of, and that like, is this guy worth it? Because if he, as you said, doesn't pan out, then we've got some other issues that we're suddenly dealing with. So I think that's worth keeping in mind as well. Our last question comes from Coach Aguilar. Name the players in the previous class as well as this class who are day 1 or day 2 draft picks. And Eric, I'll let you go first, but I might participate in this question as well.
Yeah. I can tell you Notre Dame believes that Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Iwatade are both day 1, day 2 pick kind of guys. They love that potential on the edge. It's something Tom Loy and I talked about in the Talking with Tom series earlier last week. It all blends together. But those are two guys that Notre Dame is absolutely high on to the point where they believe like, yeah, these are, day 1, day 2 kind of caliber guys. Personally, I think Aiden Pouncy is that kind of player as well, specifically at safety. Again, I think at corner, maybe the ceiling's a little bit lower at the NFL side, but I think he's that kind of player. And then look, it's a little bit tougher to project out like offensive linemen and wide receivers, especially when you start getting to the 4-star ranks. But one I think is interesting. I have a lot of belief in this player, man. I think Javian Osborne's a day 2 player. It's very difficult for me to sit here and say day 1. I probably would not have said Jeremiah Love was a day 1 player at high school just because the number of running backs going in that range is lower. But Osborne's a big play threat, man. And he is a strict, disciplined between the tackles runner as a big play threat with an emerging but low volume utility as a pass catcher. You tell me that doesn't sound like a profile for your favorite NFL draft running back every year. So I think that's going to be someone he's going to be someone who could emerge as like a day 2 pick in this class. And then looking back to the previous class, I wanted to select a DB, but like they all have like size issues or whatever else for like day 1. So I was like, all right, let's be a little bit more traditional. Will Black is like the obvious one, left tackle, big dude, 5-star player, easy money. Madden Faramo, despite the move away from linebackers, I think is a player who could ultimately end up being in that day 1, day 2 kind of range just because of the tools he has and quite frankly, the violence he plays with. It's awesome. And then anyone who followed me knows I am James Flanagan super fan. Elijah Burris and James Flanagan were 2 guys I kind of planted my flag on. Elijah Burris could grow into this. I'm not going to project that right now. I don't want to put too much on the young man, but I think James Flanagan has the potential to be in this range. Probably more day 2 than day 1. But he's an exceptional tight end, and especially if we look at him as like a 4-year player at Notre Dame, I think he has the potential to be a day 2 pick.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with Flanagan, especially after we've seen kind of maybe a little bit of a move back towards tight ends going earlier. I mean, we had 2 go in, I think, the top 15 picks this past year. Obviously, those are both pretty special players, but you don't even have to be a Tyler Warren type if you can get a little separation like Colston Loveland, like that
Yeah.
worked out for him too. So I think I'd have a little more hope that if he becomes the type of player we think he can be, like he's more likely to go earlier on than I would have previously thought. And I also think Elijah Burris is one to, or not Elijah, excuse me, Christopher Burgess is one to bring up just from, he has the tools. Like if things click for him once he's actually fully committed to defensive line, it's all there. Like I don't think I mean, I know he played linebacker, I believe most recently. So he hasn't even had the
Yeah.
development, but he's definitely a guy that I think plays a very valued position and kind of looks like a budding NFL player. Even when I saw him last summer, like I was like, oh,
Yeah.
he looks different than everyone else here. And there is other Notre Dame commits there as well. And I will definitely go with your expertise on the current class. You know more about them. So both of them obviously seemingly have the traits to do that as well. With that, thanks to everyone who is tuned into Irish Illustrated's Tracking the Trail podcast. Eric, as always, I greatly appreciate your insights on Notre Dame recruiting and the team's continued success in the trail in May. Be sure to check out irishillustrated.com for more in-depth recruiting coverage from Eric and Brian Alt and team coverage from the rest of our staff. I'm Drew Mentok with Eric Thomas, both from Irish Illustrated. We'll see you all soon.